All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Enabling Value featuring 4Science. I'm Kimberly Iniger, Events and Outreach Specialist at ORCID. To further inform today's session, we'd like to know a little bit more about you and your institution. So I am launching a poll right now. If you could please take the next few minutes to answer this poll so we could have some more information, we'd really appreciate it. In the meantime, I'd like to bring your attention to some features available during the webinar. The first is closed captioning and translated captions. These features allow you to enable audio captions and translate those captions into a few different languages. To enable, click on the Show Captions button in your Zoom toolbar. We also have a dedicated Q&A channel, and we invite you to submit your questions throughout the session. To do so, click on the Q&A button in the Zoom toolbar. You can also view questions other attendees have submitted, upvote the questions you're interested in, and add comments. We do have some helpful documentation available to assist you in accessing these features, which is available in the Resources tab in the Zoom toolbar. Finally, this session is being recorded, and the recording along with session materials will be shared after the session. Looks like we're still having a few of these poll results come in. So at this time, I would like to welcome Andrea Bollini, Chief Technology and Innovation Officer at 4Science, and Oliver Goldschmidt, Software Developer and System Administrator at TU Hamburg. These are our presenters for today. Before we get started on the presentation, let's go ahead and take a look at the results of this poll. All right. So our first question was, what kind of ORCID integrated system does your organization use? And it looks like a majority of participants, about 60%, are using DSpace, and then 30% are using a DSpace-CRIS system, while the rest of our attendees are using either another type of repository or CRIS system, or they don't currently utilize one of these types of systems. Our second question was, what ORCID API option does your organization use? And it looks like overwhelmingly about 55% of our audience members are using the ORCID member API. And then another 28% are using the ORCID public API, with another small fraction of the audience who aren't sure what they're using, which that's all right. And then finally, we did ask if our audience members were currently ORCID members, and it looks like about 43% of the audience is an ORCID member via one of our consortium, and then another 38% of the audience are direct members of ORCID. So I appreciate everyone taking the time to give us some more information in this poll, and at this time, I'll hand it over to Andrea to begin today's presentation.
Thanks, Kimberly, for the nice introduction, and welcome to everyone. I hope that this webinar will be as informative and useful as possible for your institution. Let me share the screen. Okay. So this webinar is about DSpace and DSpace-CRIS in regard to the ORCID integration. I will introduce briefly 4Science, our history of collaboration with ORCID, and after that we will go deeper, look into the DSpace, the plain DSpace ORCID integration. I will leave the floor to Oliver to have a real to share a real experience of an institution that are using DSpace-CRIS integrated with ORCID. And after his presentation, we are going, and live demo, we are going to analyze together which are the unique values of DSpace-CRIS and what is coming next and future plan. So let me introduce my company, 4Science. 4Science is an international company that provides standing solution for research and cultural heritage. We are office in several locations in Italy and in US, in Missouri. We promote use of international standard and cutting-edge technology. international standard and open source, open standard is the most important thing and is the mission of 4Science. In all the projects that we conduct, we focus on open source technology and open standard. Our primary focus is the DSpace platform, and we are also the maintainer of the DSpace-CRIS open source extension of DSpace. 4Science is a certified platinum partner of DSpace, and also registered service provider for DataSite. We hold several certifications, including the Trusted Cloud Provider from the Cloud Security Alliance, and we are ISO 9000 certified company. And of course, we are more than proud to be the only certified service provider into the space community for ORCID. Again, what is important to say for me today is that the mission, the vision of 4Science is whatever we do, we share with the community. We work together with the domain community, with the technical community to innovate in inter-repository landscape and to support as much as possible the open science mission. Our collaboration with ORCID started several years ago, and in regard of DSpace-CRIS, DSpace-CRIS has a full ORCID bidirectional integration. That means we can get data from ORCID and we can push data to ORCID since version 4 of DSpace-CRIS. We have worked with almost all the API version of ORCID. We started with version 1.2, we moved to version 2, and we are currently on version 3, the current one. As anticipated, 4Science is a certified ORCID provider for DSpace-CRIS. This means that as an institution partner of 4Science, you will get a simplified and immediate process to move your integration to production once that you are organizational ready. With this integration, you will be able to display authenticated ORCID on your researcher profile and your publication. You will be able to respect the preference of your researcher in terms of what and when things are synchronized between the two systems, so DSpace-CRIS and ORCID. It's important to note DSpace-CRIS is an open source system, is an extension of DSpace. DSpace-CRIS provides out-of-box the integration with ORCID, is pre-configured and enabled out-of-box. The only thing that you need with DSpace-CRIS is to provide your API. In regard to DSpace, prior DSpace 7.3, the ORCID integration was really limited, and you were only able to make a basic lookup into registry to identify author. 4Science has contributed to bidirectional ORCID integration to DSpace 7.3. So starting from DSpace 7.3, you are able to use most of the ORCID integration also in a plain DSpace. 4Science has been certified as an ORCID provider also for DSpace at the very start of the certification service provider program. And now we are working on the renewal of this certification according to the new certification service provider rule by the end of this year, early next year. DSpace ORCID, the DSpace ORCID integration is not enabled by default. This is one difference compared to DSpace-CRIS. So if you want to use this integration, you need to perform some configuration change. You need to manually enable this feature, and we will talk more about that soon. So it's important to note when we talk about certified provider that it's important what the provider do for the community. And at 4Science, we are very proud of to be the most active contributors for the DSpace community. We give back to the community more than any other provider in the community. And we are the only ORCID certified provider in the DSpace community. We thank all the institutions that chose 4Science as partner for their project, because choosing us gives us the possibility to give back to the community. So institutions that partner with 4Science are also indirectly supporting the DSpace community. It's important to keep in mind that the certification process, so certified service provider, the certification is not about, or not only about the software, but is mostly about the practice, the experience, the skill that the provider put in support for to your project. So now I like to go deeper on the integration available in a plain DSpace with ORCID. Please keep in mind, until we will switch to Oliver, we are just talking about the plain DSpace software. We are not yet talking about DSpace-CRIS. So, which is the list of functionalities that the ORCID integration enable on your DSpace repository? It depends on the API that you are going to configure in your repository. You can configure public API or member API. If you are just using the public API, you will be able to eventually enable the authentication via ORCID. You will be able to connect the local researcher profile to ORCID, so to gather authenticated ORCID ID, and you will be able to import the researcher profile and publication from the ORCID registry. If you are able to, if you have ORCID member and you can put your member API in DSpace, you will be able also to write data to ORCID. This means that you will be able to push biographic information to the ORCID registry about your researcher. You will be able to push affiliation, education, qualification, or publication, project, and allow your researcher to manage ORCID synchronization preferences. How this integration works technically? Technically speaking, there are three main concepts that you need to understand on the DSpace side. In DSpace, we have the DSpace user that are named ePerson, and we have the DSpace researcher profile that is a person item, is a configurable entity, a new feature available in DSpace 7. These two things exist on the DSpace side. On the right side, you have the ORCID person, that is the ORCID profile on the ORCID registry. The integration allows you to connect the DSpace user, so the DSpace account, with the ORCID credential. If you enable the authentication that require only the public API, you can log in DSpace using the ORCID credential. And this means that you have coupled the ORCID profile with the person in DSpace. To create a link between the user account, so the credential in DSpace, and the researcher profile, you need to enable the research profile feature. That means that an account in DSpace can have a public item that represents the researcher experience, that tell more about the research activity. The connection of this researcher profile with ORCID is what is needed to get authenticated ORCID ID. So to authenticate your ORCID ID, you need to connect the researcher profile with the ORCID person on the ORCID registry. And this can still be done just using the public API. If you want to push data to ORCID, you need to have established such connection between the researcher profile and the person ORCID registry. And you need to use the member API to push data to ORCID. So to push data about a person, to push data about work and project investigated by this researcher. Another feature is the possibility to get data from ORCID about researcher and about publication authored by a specific researcher. And this can be done just using the public API. So what is needed to enable the ORCID integration in DSpace? Keep in mind that this slide will be shared after the webinar. So you see that these are linked to the exact documentation and configuration file that you need to modify. So I hope that will be useful for institutions that are going to enable this integration. As anticipated, the ORCID integration is not enabled by default. So you need to perform some step in order to have this integration working. This integration is built on top of other optional features that you need to enable. The first one, the most important one, is the configurable entities. So in DSpace 7, you are not just talking about item, generic item that usually mean publication, but you can characterize your item and say that a specific item describes a person, another item describes a project, another item describes a publication. And you can express which relation exists among these entities. This is the configurable entities feature that you need to enable. The researcher profile feature is the one that was shown in the previous slide that allow you to link a user account with a person item. If you want to push data to ORCID, you need to configure your ORCID member API. Keep in mind that you are not required to enable the ORCID login. So you don't need to use the ORCID authentication if you only want to pull and push data to ORCID. The ORCID authentication and the ORCID's connection are two separate features in DSpace. So you can use the ORCID Connect without necessarily allow user to log in into system via ORCID. And your researcher must connect their local profile with ORCID, explicitly granting permission to the DSpace repository to manipulate their profile, because this is the way that ORCID works. The power, the control is in the hand of the researcher. It's the researcher that decides if and when something needs to be synchronized with their ORCID profile. It's not enough to just have the ORCID API. How it is work? When you are logged in DSpace, you have access to the profile page where the first box includes the researcher profile that allow you to link an account to a person item. And this is the very first step. This is a mandatory step to enable the integration. You need to create this person item. You need to create the researcher profile. And from there, you can move to the researcher profile, and your researcher is offered with the ORCID button that you see in the top right to connect this person item with the ORCID person profile. And this will start the three-legged OAuth process. So you will be presented with a page where you are offered with the connect to ORCID ID. If the researcher click on that, is redirected on ORCID for authenticate themselves. And once that this is done, is go back to the DSpace repository where the ORCID authorization that was granted are listed, and you can eventually use this panel also to disconnect from ORCID if needed. Once that you have established the connection with the ORCID person into registry, your researcher is able to manage the synchronization settings. So he can decide if he wants to synchronize everything manually, or if it's like to have a nightly process to automatically push everything that has been created or modified onto the space side to ORCID automatically. And the researcher can also decide what is synchronized with ORCID. So he can decide to keep enabled to publication synchronization, to funding through synchronization, and the geographic information. And the page also shows a list of a queue of objects that need to be synchronized, that can be eventually pushed manually or will be synchronized automatically over the night if this is the preference. Something that are really important to know. Of course, you must provide your ORCID API key, and only member API key allow repository to write to ORCID registry. Otherwise, the ORCID integration will not work. You must actively use the researcher profile. So if you have created a researcher profile for your researcher, you need to link this researcher profile to their publication, their project. Otherwise, this relation and this other object cannot be pushed to ORCID. Only publication and project items are synchronized. So you need to use configurable entities also to describe your publication. You cannot synchronize a generic DSpace item with ORCID. You can synchronize publication item, project item with ORCID. ORCID has a validation rule on their side. So some fields are mandatory, other fields are subject to controlled lists, to vocabularies. If you make change to your DSpace metadata, or if you don't provide enough information in your record, the synchronization could fail. And the user interface will prevent you to send this incomplete information to ORCID, and will inform that if you want to reference an organization, you need to know an identifier about this organization. If you want to send the publication, the title is required, is mandatory, and things like that. Of course, this means that sometime, often, your researcher will be in the need to reach your administrator, because they, the researcher, will be not able to perform to fix this metadata directly, because they cannot edit already archived publication or project to improve the metadata quality. The ORCID lookup is based on the import of ORCID person in DSpace. And this means that only administrators are able to import data from import author from ORCID during a submission. Another thing to pay attention is DSpace also have an ORCID authority. This is just an old feature, an alternative way to integrate with ORCID that has been provided just for continuity for institutions that were using this integration in previous version of DSpace. But if you are a new user of DSpace 7, or if you want to enjoy the full benefit of the ORCID integration, you should not use the ORCID authority. The ORCID integration heavily depends on the configurable entities. So if there are misconfiguration, bugs, or unideal behavior on these configurable entities, this will affect your ORCID integration. And unfortunately, we know that this feature is still young in the space and is not unusual with this sort of issue. What we suggest is to report all these issues, both related to user experience, both related to bugs, or any difficulty in configuring this feature as a bug on GitHub, so that the community can fix it. Here you will get a list of relevant configurations that are needed for DSpace. So where you can configure the configurable entities feature, how to enable the research profile feature, how to manage auto mapping between the DSpace metadata and the ORCID metadata. I would like to leave the floor to Oliver now for a demo that will reflect the integration in a DSpace-CRIS installation. So what I say so far is just related to a plain DSpace. Is not completely true for DSpace-CRIS, and we will talk again about that just after Oliver.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. I will share my screen. I have prepared some slides. I will do a live demonstration when I'm through the slides. It's not very many. I don't have very many slides, so this will be fast. First, I would like to show you something about our system. It's named TORE. I will explain what it is and what we're doing with that. I will show you some use cases for what we are using the ORCID integration of DSpace-CRIS. And after that, I will show you a live demonstration as I announced. I will also talk a little bit about the ORCID login project we are having at the moment with 4Science, but Andrea will go into detail about that a little bit later. First, we are using a system based on DSpace-CRIS, as I mentioned. Our system has the name TORE, which stands for TUHH Open Research. TUHH is the Hamburg University of Technology in Germany. This is the institution where I'm from. On TORE, we have publications with or without full text. We have research data, and we have a complete research information system, which includes researchers from our university, institutes, conferences, journals, and so on. We are providing an institutional repository since 2003, so 20 years ago we started with the software Opus, but only containing publications with full text. So this was extended while we had the repository already. In 2015, we switched the software basis to DSpace, and in 2017, we switched to DSpace-CRIS. The main reason for that was because we wanted the ORCID integration, which DSpace-CRIS already had at this time, but not normal DSpace. In 2019, we had a larger scaled project here in Hamburg, and we extended our institutional repository with research data and publications without full text to satisfy the full CRIS scope. That was also the point in time where we introduced some of the other entity types which we haven't been using before. Some months ago, just 3 months ago, we switched to DSpace-CRIS 7, or I should say we updated to DSpace-CRIS 7. Before that, our software basis was DSpace-CRIS on version 5. So this was a heavy effort to switch to DSpace-CRIS 7, but 3 months ago, we managed to do that. So all you will see now is based on DSpace-CRIS 7. As I said, I want to show you some use cases from the ORCID integration before I show a live demonstration. The first use case is authentication via ORCID. Andrea also told you that this is prerequisite to use the ORCID integration and to push things to ORCID. So, of course, we are using the ORCID authorization, which is working with the Connect to ORCID ID button, which hopefully will result in the screenshot we are seeing here, where granted authorizations are listed and no missing authorizations are there. As I said, we migrated or updated to DSpace-CRIS 7, and while we did that, there was a problem with some of the persons we have migrated. For those persons, we are seeing this kind of confusing information. There are granted authorizations, but at the same time, the same authorizations are missing. Luckily, this is not a very serious error. It's just a confusing display. So if the authorizations are granted, everything works here. We are also using the ORCID lookup Andrea announced already. This is something we are doing in the process of getting new content into the repository. So we are looking up persons via ORCID and in our local database. When it's an ORCID match, we have some different information, or some less information about the person, but this should be enough to decide if this is really the person who is submitting something there. Local match will have more information, but not very many more information. Choosing a person from ORCID will create this person in TORE. So when we are using the ORCID match and selecting that in the lookup process, this person is going to be imported into our local database. And next time on the ORCID lookup for persons, you will find the local match for this person. A frequently asked question is, what about the ORCID ID badge? There are some restrictions from ORCID that this badge should only be displayed for authenticated IDs. So the prerequisite to show this badge is that the person, him or herself, has authenticated this profile via ORCID. In DSpace-CRIS, this is supported out of the box. So when you are authenticated, when you have authenticated your researcher profile at ORCID, you will find this ID badge automatically in some context. For instance, on publication item pages, on the researcher page, or in result lists of search results you get on the system. There is just one problem with this. These badges are not displayed for private researcher profiles, as you see here for David Schulenberg, who has a private researcher profile in our system. He has authenticated his ORCID, but it's not displayed because the researcher profile is not visible publicly. We are offering to push items to ORCID, as Andrea also showed you. You can select between manual and automatic synchronization with ORCID records, but we are only using this function for publications. So we don't allow push of projects, of biographical information, affiliations. We do not do this because before we migrated, we did not have these functions. And so we decided to start with the functions we had before and not to extend them in the first step. As I said, I would like to say some words about the project, which is funded by ORCID via the Global Participation Fund at the moment. We are doing this project with 4Science on the technical support side. The aim of the project is to improve the login process of ORCID. At the moment, it's a problem that users who don't release their email address on ORCID, who have a private email address there, will not be able to authenticate, to log in into TORE with their ORCID account, because TORE cannot see this email address. Even if the email address is publicly available, it might happen that there can be redundant researcher profiles. So a duplication of the researcher profile might happen when the researcher profile's email is not identical to the email on ORCID side. So this is the main target of the project, to improve that. And 4Science already has some approaches for this. They have implemented the first thing we can test, but this is the current status. We are going to test that, and we'll see if this does everything right. This development, I should mention that, will be ported to DSpace as soon as possible. Andrea will go into detail about that a little bit later. The DSpace-CRIS implementation is expected by the end of this year. So if there are no major bugs inside which we find while testing, it should be available in the next release. So let's see a live demonstration if I have some time left. I'm going out of time, but maybe a quick demonstration. I have already logged in to TORE. You see that here. And I will just show you how to get to the ORCID settings. As Andrea showed already, there is the researcher profile section here where I can view this researcher profile, which is my researcher profile. And in this menu here, I can open the ORCID setting page. There we see this box where the granted authorizations are listed, and fortunately no missing authorizations are there. There I can set the synchronization mode between manual and batch synchronization. I can decide if I don't want to push any publications, or if I would like to push all publications. And I have the registry queue where I see which publications I can push right now. I can do that just for demonstrating that. Might take a short time, but then the submission to ORCID was complete, and you can find it now in my ORCID profile. I think as I'm out of time, I will switch back to Andrea now to let him finish with his presentation.
Thanks, Oliver, and sorry to get some of your time on my side. So I would like to proceed from the Global Participation Fund program, the project we are conducting together, that we are implementing for the Technical University of Hamburg. As said, we want to improve the user experience for the login process in DSpace-CRIS. Which is the problem? When you have a private email address on ORCID, essentially you get this not so nice page on DSpace-CRIS. You get, after the attempt to log in, you get unauthorized, and just be informed that your email need to be set as public on the ORCID side. But this is really confusing for the user, and some users really don't want to release their email address. So the other problem is when the user has a different email address in ORCID than the one used in DSpace. What this currently mean is that the user is able to log in DSpace, but a new account is created. So the information about the same user are spread over two separate accounts. And of course, also this is absolutely unideal. So which is the solution? The solution is conceptually very, very easy. So if the email address is not provided by ORCID, is not released by ORCID, or if we get an email that we don't know and is not recognized in the system, we just ask the user. And the user can manually provide an email address or a different email address, or say, I want to log in also with a different authentication method in DSpace, like the LDAP or password authentication, so that we are sure that we can merge these two separate accounts in a single one. Of course, if the email address is manually provided by the user, there are some security implications behind that, but we will manage everything on the back end, sending a validation link by email so that we are sure that the user is the owner of the mailbox that is claiming. And the very nice news is that just yesterday, the development has been completed and merged in the development branch of DSpace-CRIS. So you can actually find this feature on the 4Science GitHub. These are screens taken from the development, so are not wireframe, are real screen taken from our development system. This is the page that is presented when you log in via ORCID, but your email address is not public on the ORCID side or not shared with trusted parties. In this case, the user is invited to enter the email address. So in this case, I enter my email address, Bollini4science.it. And I can ask to send a verification link to claim this email. The other option is I log it in via ORCID, and I have an email address that is public on ORCID, but this email address is not known in the system. So it could be just the case that I'm a new user. This is perfectly fine, and I can confirm the email and go ahead. Or, as in my case, it's an issue because my company has changed the domain some year ago. So we moved from .it to .com. So I have the .com email address on ORCID, but still have the .it in old DSpace repository. So, and this will lead me to create a duplicate account. But now I can fix that and manually say, okay, I want to use the .it that I still have access, or I will use the other authentication method to force the system to use a single account. If I'm going to merge two different accounts, I'm presented with a merge page where I get the information that was received from ORCID, the information that are eventually present in the other DSpace account. And when they are different, as in the case of last name that ORCID provide Bollini, and I adjust the L into the DSpace system, I can decide to override the current value using the information from ORCID. So I want to talk now briefly to highlight the unique value of this DSpace-CRIS integration in regard to ORCID. First of all, DSpace-CRIS is a production-ready system. It's configured out of box to support the richer data model. So enabled configurable entities is not an option, it's the default. You have configurable entities enabled and properly working with a configuration that is production ready. It's not a sample, it's not something that you are strictly required to improve or to change. It's based on what the international standards recommend and is useful for most institutions. If you need to make change, of course, you can also extend to adapt it to your specific need. The other, another important difference is the possibility to manage the researcher profile with much more decentralization than in a normal DSpace. So DSpace-CRIS allow a granular security. This means that the researchers are able to manage directly some information in their researcher profile without using the administer item page that is too much power and risky for a normal user because they allow to edit raw data. And specifically, this administer page in a normal DSpace allow you to also manually change the ORCID ID or to remove the information or add the information that this ORCID ID was authenticated. And this is why the displaying DSpace integration cannot properly display the ORCID badge on the ORCID profile nor on the publication, because also an authenticated ORCID on a normal DSpace is not sufficient protected against manipulation. So you cannot guarantee that this is an authenticated ORCID ID. And this is against the best practice and the guideline provided by ORCID. Another issue is also if you completely trust your researchers, so they will not manipulate the data, you can not prevent misattribution. So if someone else during the submission identify your researcher as an author just using the lookup, so this connection will be established between the person and the project and the publication. And you have no evidence if this ORCID, if this publication was accepted by the other researcher, the co-author, or not. And if someone identified the wrong co-author, there is no way for the researcher to unclaim, to reject this misattribution. So at the publication level, this ORCID ID cannot be considered really authenticated. These are just screens where you see the ORCID badge show in the publication list, in the publication detail page, on the profile detail page. These are screens to remind you what we are talking about. This is a normal DSpace. This is the way that DSpace allow researchers to manage their data, their information in the researcher profile. So as you see, you have this information, DSpace ORCID authenticated with the date that I can easily manipulate. I can drop or I can add if it was missing. And I can manipulate the person identifier ORCID and put something that is syntactically invalid or the ORCID ID of another person. In DSpace-CRIS, it doesn't work in this way. The researcher has access to a user interface that is much more user-friendly, avoid to make mistake, and prevent you to manipulate data that you don't have the right to change. So the ORCID ID is visible in read-only mode, and you cannot change that on the user interface nor on the REST API. Oliver also showed the lookup process in DSpace-CRIS. Keep in mind that DSpace-CRIS use a different lookup mechanism than the plain DSpace. In DSpace-CRIS, you are able to look up for external author, get an not authenticated ORCID ID for external author, without forcing you to import this external author as a local researcher profile. So when this researcher eventually will join your institution, he will be able to authenticate the ORCID ID, confirm the publication that was linked, and this will become an authenticated ORCID ID. So DSpace-CRIS will also keep track of this external ORCID ID, but it's able to differentiate between authenticated and not authenticated ORCID ID. Another major difference is related to the import functionality. DSpace-CRIS is also able to automatically suggest to individual researchers publications that are available on their ORCID profile, but not yet available on the repository. And this is done in two different mechanisms. If you just have member API, we are pulling the ORCID API key to discover new content. If you have access to the premium ORCID API, we will take advantage of the webhook feature of the ORCID to provide this information in near real time. So as soon as your researcher adds something to their ORCID profile, or another system had something to the ORCID profile of your researcher, DSpace will be informed, and this notification message will appear for your researcher saying that there is content that they is eventually interested to import. And by the way, this functionality has been contributed to DSpace. We are still waiting for the review and the merge of the pull request that is blocking this functionality to appear in DSpace, unfortunately since May of 2022. But now this pull request has been targeted for DSpace 8. So we hope that having this blocking pull request merged in DSpace 8 will allow us to donate this advanced import feature for DSpace 9. And this is how the suggestions that we found on the ORCID side are presented to the user and can be eventually transformed in DSpace side. Last but not least, the push feature of DSpace-CRIS is much more advanced than the one in DSpace. We provide richer data to ORCID because the data in DSpace-CRIS are out-of-box richer. So the DSpace configuration include all the bibliographic detail that are recommended by OpenAIRE and are used in modern systems, so to give context about your research. And this information are transmitted to ORCID. Moreover, DSpace-CRIS embeds a CSL engine processor that allow us to generate bibtext format for the publication that are sent to ORCID. So we include in the publication sent to ORCID a bibtext, a structured citation in the bibtext format. This is how basic article look like when pushed from DSpace to ORCID. So very basic information available. Another article pushed from DSpace-CRIS, you see that there are much more detail about the publisher DOI, handle, other identifier, but more important, there is a show citation here in citation bibtext, and if you click on that, you get a bibtext citation where you have also detail like the volume number, page number, things like that. Talking about what is coming, the next DSpace-CRIS version that is expected by the end of this month will also include support for the ROR ID at the organization level. So this means that you will be able to look up for organization when you are detailing the past employee or employment or the education, the qualification of your researcher using the research organization registry. And this information will be also provided during the integration with ORCID so that we can uniquely identify the organization when we push this data to ORCID. So maybe you are asking yourself about what you should do if you need something that is currently available in DSpace-CRIS, but not yet available in DSpace. Well, you have two options, in my opinion. You can upgrade to DSpace-CRIS. DSpace-CRIS is an open source extension of DSpace. You don't lose anything, but you will get a lot of additional feature and more stability and better performance for your repository. You can also decide to port the individual feature that you need from DSpace-CRIS to DSpace. So DSpace-CRIS is open source. Everything is available on GitHub. We have decided to adopt the same license than DSpace, and the copyright is already transferred to Lyrasis. So everyone, not just 4Science, everyone can take code from our GitHub repository and create a pull request for DSpace. So to make fast the adoption of this feature also in DSpace. We only ask if you like, if you get some feature from DSpace-CRIS that is contribute back to DSpace, please give a mention to DSpace-CRIS saying that this feature was backported from DSpace-CRIS to DSpace. More institutions will express the interest, the need to migrate to DSpace-CRIS, will migrate to DSpace-CRIS from DSpace. More evidence will be to the space community that the features that we provide are absolutely needed. And this would, in our opinion, speed up also the merge of these two platforms back together. If you are asking yourself about how to port the additional feature available in DSpace-CRIS to DSpace, well, of course, if you have developer, you have all the information that you need. As said, license has been already granted to, copyright has been already granted to LYRASIS, so you don't need anything to proceed. 4Science is constantly donating new feature, improvement, bug fixing to DSpace, so a lot of this feature from DSpace-CRIS has been already ported to DSpace, and we still plan and do that on a daily basis. For DSpace 8, the major feature that has been set as top priority from the DSpace steering came from 4Science, and some of them are porting of the DSpace-CRIS feature. So we are actively working on that. We invest thousands of hours in here in voluntary support for the community. So we need to prioritize the activities. You don't have the skill to make that, you don't have developer available, or your time is more valuable than we will be very happy to support you. So 4Science is available as a partner for your project. We will consider your requirement together. Your project could become the way to improve the DSpace source code. This is what is happening on several projects. And initiative like the Global Participation Fund that Kimberly are also noted in the chat, that there is the tier called open, are also an option, as you have seen with the Technical University of Hamburg. So you can think about something that you need for improve your ORCID integration at your institution. And if you wish, 4Science will be more than happy to assist you from the technical perspective.
All right, I think we've got a few minutes left for questions. I know we're approaching the end of the webinar, so understandable if people need to jump off. Just a reminder that this is being recorded and it will be shared with you afterwards. So thank you to Andrea and Oliver for your wonderful presentation today, and thank you for staying for an additional few minutes so we can answer these questions. Our first question, I think, Oliver, you indicated you'd like to answer is, do all persons manually need to connect to their ORCID IDs, or could these IDs be entered via a bulk import and then publications be pulled via script, and then maybe afterwards be refined by another script to complete the imported publications of their DOI?
Yes, the answer is simple. No, it's not possible to import via XLS file because the authorization must come from the person itself. So only if the person himself or herself authenticates on ORCID, they will get an access token from ORCID. And this is required to do push actions or something like that. So you cannot just import persons and their ORCID and expect that they are authenticated. I hope that answers the question.
All right, thanks, Oliver. Andrea, I think this question is for you. When will the email solution in DSpace-CRIS be added to regular DSpace?
Yes, as said, the source code is available right now on the 4Science GitHub repository. So any institution can just look to what we have recently merged and backport this code to DSpace. For sure, some adaptation will be needed because DSpace-CRIS is based on DSpace, but is an extension. So some small adaptation will be needed. Unfortunately, as for science, we have already allocated all the voluntary budget, I say more than 1,000 hours each year on other tasks for the DSpace community. So we don't have room this year to do that as a voluntary work. Of course, if this feature is not taken by others to make this port, or if we don't find partners that are interested in this feature for their project and can fund porting to the normal DSpace, we will consider this feature as one of the contribution by 4Science in DSpace 9. But you have just seen a very short list of important features that DSpace-CRIS provide more than DSpace, so it's important to understand which is most priority than other for the community.
Thank you for that answer. This question is about the DSpace repository and specifically more about the existing ORCID lookup metadata. So the question is, will ORCID IDs eventually be displayed on the deposited item page? And relatedly, is there any way to reconcile ORCID lookup ORCID IDs unauthenticated and the new authenticated ORCID IDs authenticated? As in, can these two kinds of ORCID IDs be clearly indicated and displayed on a deposited items page?
The answer is yes for DSpace-CRIS. This is the default. Authenticated ORCID ID are displayed everywhere. It makes sense. Unauthenticated ORCID ID are just displayed as a number without the ORCID badge. That is by ORCID guideline. In a normal DSpace, this is not supported technically. It will be not too much complicated technically to display the ORCID badge, but as said during the presentation, is not legitimate to do that, is not right, because you cannot guarantee that this is an authenticated ORCID ID. You can eventually use organizational policy to prevent this manipulation of the data, but technically speaking, you can always manipulate the ORCID ID and write it manually in a normal DSpace. So as 4Science, as a certified service provider for ORCID, when we host a normal DSpace, we make modification that guarantee you about that. And in our enhanced version, you will be able to display the ORCID ID. But with current DSpace or code, you are not allowed to do that. It's not technically not feasible, is that you cannot do that properly.
All right, hopefully that was a good answer. Thank you for that. Hopefully if there's any follow-up on that, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A or the chat. We've got about 5 minutes left. Andrea, this question is for you. Is DSpace-CRIS open source like DSpace is?
Yeah, absolutely yes. It's everything available on GitHub, on the 4Science organization. So github.com/4science/DSpace. And it's the same license that DSpace, as I already say. So BSD and copyright of the source code is already assigned to EuroCRIS. So you can grab the source code, open a pull request to EuroCRIS. You are not required legally to ask anything to the 4Science or to talk with 4Science if you don't like.
Good to know. This next question is, how can DSpace be configured to communicate with Vivo or VIVO using DOI?
Well, this question, I need more elaboration, honestly. So okay. If the attendee like to explain more about his system, drop us an email and we will try to give more information as soon as the context is known.
We've got about 4 minutes left. Would it be possible, this question is asking, is it possible to see a demo of the workflow of ORCID Hub to DSpace-CRIS? I'm not sure how much time that would take to set up and show.
I recognize that is an Italian name, so maybe I guess that he's talking about the Italian ORCID project that I was involved several years ago, but I'm not longer involved. No, currently we cannot demo that because this is not a normal ORCID integration, but it is based on a different protocol, different thing that was just implemented on in Italy.
All right. We do have a couple more minutes for questions if anyone would like to drop another one in the chat in the Q&A. In the meantime, I would like to invite everyone to join us at our next session of Enabling Value featuring InfoEd. It's on 9 November. I've shared in the chat the registration link for that, and more information will be coming soon about what to expect, the agenda, who's presenting, and all that good stuff. I'm also sharing now a way for you to connect with us at ORCID. This link, it shows all our different social media platforms, our events pages. It shows all the different ways that you can stay in contact with us and up to date. I think we have one more question. This one is, what should members bear in mind when migrating from older versions of DSpace to the latest version? And how can they prep for this to ensure a smooth migration?
We have given a presentation about migration experience at the Open Repository 2023 that is available on Zenodo, that give you a bit more context about which are the usual pitfalls that you need to take in consideration when you migrate from a previous version of DSpace to DSpace or DSpace-CRIS 7. Generally speaking, you can migrate from DSpace to DSpace-CRIS, from an old version of DSpace to DSpace-CRIS 7. This is supported, and the migration could be very easy if you don't have customized your DSpace in an extensive way, or could require a more careful analysis if you make customization or advanced configuration of your institution, of your repository.
All right, well, thank you for that answer, Andrea. I do think we're about at time. I do want to thank everyone for staying on a few extra minutes so we could get through Q&A. And of course, thank you to Andrea and Oliver for sticking around to answer those questions. And of course, for their wonderful presentation today. We might be getting a few more in the chat. I'll be sure to follow up with people, both with Andrea and Oliver, to get some answers to those questions, and we'll include that in the follow-up email when we share the recording of this presentation and the session materials. But I just want to say thank you again for the two of you for joining us, and thank you to our audience for their great participation today, and we hope to see you all at a future event. Thanks, everyone.